You are listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast.
The Catholic Church is the largest Christian denomination in the United States. It's 23% of the U.S. population. That makes the Catholic vote important for any candidate. For many decades, a large percentage of American Catholics favored the Democrat Party. But given that Democrats have embraced so many radical positions, many Catholics are now supporting Donald Trump. With us today is John McCullough, co-author of A Catholic Vote for Trump, on today's New Book of Daniel podcast. Hello and welcome to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski. I'll be your host on this adventure. You would think that with the abortion issue, more Catholics would be voting not for the Democratic Party since they've embraced abortion big time. You're going to find out that's not the case and hasn't been the case for decades. Our guest today is Mr. John McCullough. He's co-author of the book, A Catholic Vote for Trump. I'm going to poke and prod a bit. For the most part, though, I let John do most of the talking. I'm not a member of the Catholic Church, but I do find this book to be quite interesting. And if you happen to be a member of the Catholic Church, maybe you'll find it interesting as well, and the book as well. I am going to put a link to that book down in the show notes down below and some other links that John wanted me to put in. By the way, if you're watching this on video, know that this is an audio-only interview. But let's jump straight in now to our interview with Mr. John McCullough. All right, I'm joined here today with Mr. John McCullough, who is the co-author of a book titled A Catholic Vote for Trump, the only choice in 2020 for Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike. Thank you, John, for joining the program.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
So you you're co-author on this book. You've been catching some flack for it on some sides of the political aisle. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about it. I personally am not a Catholic, but I wanted you to be able to kind of explain the book to us. So let's start by giving me a background here. What was the motivation for writing this book?
Well, I'm a devout Catholic, and I just really Trump's message resonated with me. There's something about him. At the beginning, it seemed, it's like, wow, Donald Trump's running. It just seemed a little odd. But then when I would listen to him, it seemed like he was just telling the truth, and everything he said seemed true. It especially irked me seeing how many Catholics, some of them quite prominent, and even conservative Catholics, they attacked the man. They thought the worst of him. They believed the worst of him. And I would listen to him and I would think, this is terrible what they're doing. I know people at TAN. I talked to them about the idea of a book. They have an author. One of their better authors is a guy named Jesse Romero. And he wanted to do a Trump book as well. And so we worked together and we produced A Catholic Vote for Trump.
So, John, when we're talking about Catholic voters, I've got Catholics in my family, very staunch Catholics in my family. And I have some who vote Republican and some who are staunch Democrats. Could you please address for our listeners your perspective, coming from a Democratic background, your perspective of Catholic voters?
Well, yeah, the Catholic voter, it's kind of an interesting story. I'll try to be brief, but by and large, the majority of Catholics in the country historically were, white ethnic Catholics from the great waves of immigration. So the Irish, the Italians, the Poles, and then in the Southwest, Mexicans coming in and different other Latin Americans. And growing up in the Boston area, it was more unusual for me to know a Republican than than a non-Catholic. It's just that we're all Democrats, and that's I think it's the perception that back then, they were the party for the working man, the term labor Democrats, and so sadly, what has happened over the last few decades is the Democratic Party has moved further and further left socially, and Catholic voters, many have moved on from the Democratic Party, like myself, like Jesse, when they see that they're in favor of abortion and all these radical things that contradict, that we can't reconcile with our faith. But many have not. Many have been sort of, there's been this idea that, well, that doesn't matter to me. That's somebody else's choice. As long as somebody says the right things about my labor issue, that's fine. But there's this concept, the seamless garment. I think it was propagated principally by Cardinal Bernardin, liberal cardinal of, I think, Chicago. But the seamless garment holds that, you look at all the issues, not just abortion or whatever. You can look at what's their position on a minimum wage, for instance, or something like this. And so it really is, the waters for Catholics have been muddied. The lack of backbone by the bishops over the last 40 years in failing to use excommunication of politicians that actively promote and support abortion. Excommunication is really medicinal. It's really just acknowledging something, saying, okay, yes, you've convinced us, Joe Biden. We agree with you. You aren't Catholic. You don't believe what we believe. And so let's just make it official. And the bishops have not done that. But suffice to say that Donald Trump has flipped over the apple cart. I mean, all of his policies are waking up Catholic Democrats around the country, in my family, in the family, extended family of friends of mine. I'm hearing from many people that tell me, oh, my relative who referred to the Republican Party as the dark side, they're going to vote for Trump.
Well, one of the criticisms that I read about your book was that it does not align with Catholicism. And I'm looking at your book, and I'm going through the chapters, and I'm seeing that you quote the Catechism quite a bit in your book. How do you respond to someone who says that your position doesn't align with Catholicism?
Well, one thing about the Amazon reviews, it's interesting. It's almost universally either 5 stars or 1 star. And almost all the 5 stars, it says verified purchase. Almost all, if not all, the 1 stars, it doesn't say verified purchase. And if you read their review, you can tell, you think this person did not read the book. They just hate Trump. They have Trump derangement syndrome. And so, but how I would respond to that person is that, first of all, read the book. I mean, it's not true. We go through the Catechism, teachings of popes. We bring in on the topic of the fake news. We have a citation from the Catechism.
You have a chapter in your book titled "Fake News." Let's talk about that real briefly. What's with this chapter on fake news? Why do you put that in the book?
I've been very into following, people like, Tracy and Brian at Uncovered DC and The Last Refuge and all sorts of. So I've been reading all the MAGA blogs, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't know how corrupt the news media is. And so the fake news chapter, I would say it could be divided into 2 equal parts. One part is giving concrete examples of areas in which the fake news has lied, just out and out lied, misled the American people for ulterior motives to destroy Trump. So that's half the chapter. But really the other half of the chapter, there's a subtitle called The Church's Views on the Role of the Media. And so it goes through in not great detail, but some detail. This is what the church says the media should do, and asks the reader to contrast that with what you've seen.
But by the way, one of the criticisms of your book was that it wasn't well documented or researched. I have the Kindle version, and you have phenomenal citations in your book. And the joy of the Kindle version is that you provide hot links. So I was able to go and read some of the hot links, that you had quoted. So it's a well documented, well cited book. I did come across, and this is. Sorry to not quote your book. I'm going to quote one of your links.
No, that's fine.
But you quoted something from Rolling Stone magazine back from January of 2020, and I'm quoting an article from Matt Taibbi, and it says, news agencies began to realize that their demographics would not punish them for getting things wrong, so long as underlying messages were pleasing. Corrections went out of vogue for the same reason. That's kind of true. I mean, as long as somebody's getting their ears tickled for what they feel, then they don't care if the news isn't true.
That's right. And I think that was something that we tried to do in the book, was to draw in sources that aren't necessarily not just not Catholic, but not friendly either to Trump or to Catholicism. Like that writer met, I don't know if it's Taibbi or Taibbi, but he's a very good writer. I think I know he is no fan of the Catholic Church nor of Trump, but he's been an honest writer about what has happened with the media, and he has written some of the best critical pieces, criticizing people like Rachel Maddow and others. I think that's a strength of the book, the sourcing, and the fact, as I said, that we draw in people that aren't necessarily friendly to Catholicism. You know, the majority of the book, of course, is original material. It's Jesse and me, our thoughts on Trump from a Catholic perspective. But we got permission from, and I want to mention and thank publicly, Tracy and Brian Cates. Brian's excellent article, this goes back a ways, but his excellent article on Spygate. And my wife read the book and she said, wow, that really explains it. I hear you rattling on about this all the time, but this really helps me to understand what was done. So it really was a joy to get all this stuff off for Jesse and I, get it off our chest, our feelings, but also to meet, at least via email and phone, some of these other people that are doing such great work.
Again, I'm going to bring this back to the question for the Catholic voter who is still leaning Democrat, who looks at what the Democrat Party is saying, and I will emphasize saying as opposed to necessarily doing, because they say that they're for healthcare and for protecting the poor and whatnot. It's one thing to give a hand out, and it's another thing to give a hand up. It's what way that I've looked at things for many years now. And one of the things that you and I talked about briefly before going on the air was that Trump is basically waging a war against a corrupt system, kind of the establishment, right?
Right.
And with that is the Democrat perspective of, I will say, deception, where they're saying, oh, well, he's got kids in cages down below. That's kind of tie into the fake news a little bit. But he's putting kids in cages, which, again, if people aren't paying attention, that was actually started in the Obama administration.
Right.
Nobody said a peep about it then. But does your book tell the Democrat voting Catholic, does it dive into that so that it gives them more education?
It really does. It goes into, and for that, we have our second chapter 2 is called Main Street versus Wall Street. And this is where Trump's message, I mean, I don't understand a Catholic old style labor Democrat like my relatives. I don't understand how they could be against Trump, given what he's done and what he says, all of his beliefs. And if I could read a passage about that, I think it encapsulates the situation. I'll try to be brief. Is that right?
Sure.
If you, as a self-described Catholic Democrat, are rabidly pro-abortion, or if the promotion of the LGBTQ agenda and the normalization of things like drag queen story hour loom large in your list of vital issues to support, you probably don't care that much about all the above. You will never vote for Trump or anyone like him, as long as the Democrats continue to trot out candidates like this year's roster of radicals in their primary. But if you are an old-fashioned Catholic labor or Hispanic Democrat, not particularly enthused about the Democratic Party platform with respect to that stuff, or if you are a Catholic Democrat because your parents were and their parents before them, and because the Democrats were once the party of the union and the working man, well, then what do you disagree with in this chapter? Donald Trump is your man. He is fighting for you and your family. The economic results of his first term speak for themselves. Pre-coronavirus. The book was released on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, that is key too, by the way. We have a faction that says that Trump is truth bending. He's fighting desperately to get his second term because he's just a liar and whatnot. And I respond to that and say, wait a minute, that had we not had a Marxist-loving deep state that basically exploited COVID, drowned us in what I call fear porn,
Right, right.
Shutting down the economy unnecessarily. Totally. I mean, I'm working on my own book right now called, working title is The Scorched Earth War Against Liberty.
That's right.
But they basically don't care about destroying the economy as long as they're try to win back power.
That's the scary thing about these people. Look what they will stop at nothing. They don't care what they destroy to A, regain power, but also B, keep out of jail. Because a lot of these people, all the way to the top, Biden, I mean, the Biden story, and it's been covered, elsewhere in great detail. The story we have in our book, a story of two quid pro quos. And Biden is on video bragging about leaning on, pressuring, essentially getting a quid pro quo to keep his son's company out of trouble. I think Trump, it's funny, the book ends, I tell people I didn't vote for him despite his character. I voted for him because of his character. He's got the virtues we need right now. He is incredibly brave, self-sacrificing. He's ready to go to war with these people.
From a Catholic perspective, I look at the two candidates and from a Christian perspective and say, I don't see the Democrat side of things, especially Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, promoting God.
Right.
And yet I see Trump promoting God all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm thinking just on that, I mean, you take away their character altogether. If you took their character out of it and just looked at what they propose to do for the country and what they stand for that way, to me, it seems like a no-brainer that a Catholic would say, why would I vote for somebody who wants to take God out of everything?
That's right. Yeah, we have a wonderful foreword in the book by one of the most prominent Catholic priests in the anti-abortion pro-life movement, Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. And he wrote a magnificent foreword. We'll have to get that out on the internet just, on its own, because he makes the case tremendously well. And his catchphrase, I guess the key phrase from that is, if Trump was not where he is, we would not be where we are, meaning his organization, Priests for Life in particular, but also had Hillary Clinton won, and if Joe Biden wins, we will not be free to practice our faith. We will not be free. Yeah, I don't know. This is very much a tipping point. They are so hostile. The Democrats are so hostile to things that we Catholics hold dear. It's a very critical election.
I don't doubt you for a second. I wholeheartedly underscore what you're saying. We just need to look at states like California and Virginia, where they're threatening to throw people in jail. They're fining churches for having service.
Right.
They're saying you must stay closed indefinitely. They're not even giving them an end date. There's no conditions for reopening. They're just saying we're going to close it. They're saying you can't even sing.
Right.
They actually sent plants into some of these churches. I just read yesterday where they're sending some plants into churches, spies, and finding out what's going on. And they come back and then they cite them with all
right.
these quote unquote violations. If as California goes, so goes the country. I mean, Joe Biden has not denounced any of that.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the mask is off, really, and we see that with the riots. The mask is off as to what the Democrat Party is about now. I just don't see how, the guys that I grew up with, I'm 50, just turned 51. The guys I grew up with outside of Boston, I just can't understand. Are you serious? You're still going to vote for these people? This is crazy. I mean, and look at what's going on with the riots. This is full-blown Marxism. Our publisher, Tan, just came out with another book that's very timely by a noted historian at Grove City College named Paul Kengor, called The Devil and Karl Marx. And he goes through the Marxist fascination with Satan and the diabolic and the demonic. And I don't know, when Paul started that book, he probably didn't think it would be made so timely by these protests and, tearing down. They want to destroy everything. They wanted to, tearing down statues of Saint Junipero Serra, who was a great friend to the natives. It's insane.
To me, it's a facade. It's this whole BLM Antifa movement is nothing but a facade. It's a Marxist, and I've written about this at Uncover DC.
Right, I've seen that.
It sounds like what you're saying is that if a Catholic votes for a Democrat, they're basically shooting themselves in the foot.
They are, if they care about. I mean, if they genuinely care. That's the thing. A lot of people are. I would have this saying, like in my own family, I would see people, good, practicing Catholics in the sense that we would go to church every Sunday. But I had this saying as I got older and I looked back on it, that if you were a Catholic in Boston in the 70s and 80s and 90s, even if you went to church every Sunday, but you read the Boston Globe every day, you had a 0% chance that you would hold the faith at the end of that time, because the whole preponderance of, you really have to fight to be a practicing, in that Orthodox Catholic, I would say, somebody that goes to confession, confession has gone out the window. And so for many people, once you go back to confession, I don't know, it's a very key thing in the life of a Catholic, the sacramental life. And so I think there are many people that call themselves Catholic. I'm not saying they're not Catholic, but they're not practicing the faith as fully as we're supposed to. And it's probably not their fault, because there's been kind of a collapse in catechesis, both at the local level and the bishops. So you have good bishops and bad bishops. So it's an interesting thing. But I think that even if the Catholic Democrats, the pro-life issue doesn't much matter to them, they might say, I'm personally pro-life, but I'm not going to impose my views. I mean, all law is an imposition of one's views. This is what we put in the book. If I want to drive 100 miles per hour in a school zone, I'm not allowed to do that. Somebody imposes their values on me. But I think that a lot of Catholics that aren't big on the social issues, just for common sense and looking at the crime and the Marxist, the riots, the police, to fund the police insanity. If this is an honest election, I think Trump would win 48, 49 states. So, but we're in big trouble with all the things that they're trying to lay the groundwork for, mail-in ballots, and so I don't know what the answer. I don't know what the answer to that is.
That's a totally different topic there. That's
right.
Scary stuff going on there. So this book, and I'm talking with John McCullough, co-author of A Catholic Vote for Trump, and this book is available on Amazon and other places. You've got 8 chapters in this book. Love, I'll just kind of float through them here really quick. The first chapter is called Love. Second chapter, Main Street versus Wall Street. And then there's the corrupt establishment. Then fake news, which we've talked about here. The people versus the global elites. Foreign policy. I will rout you out. You've got that in quotes.
Yep.
And the swamp strikes back. In our remaining time here, which one of those chapters do you think people who are Catholic and are sitting on the fence, what should they be reading? If they were to pick up the book and read one chapter, what should that be?
I suppose for labor Catholics, it would be Main Street versus Wall Street. But also, I think Trump on foreign policy, is very, very strong. He's demonstrated. Catholics, we should love peace. We should love peace in the world. And I think Trump has accomplished great things. Witness his groundbreaking agreement that he brokered between the United Arab Emirates and Israel. And I think that in the Middle East, he's doing things that people never thought possible. And I think that the Obama administration, deliberately or not, and I have my very strong opinion about that, I think deliberately, every single thing we did, everywhere that the things that we supported, Arab Spring, everywhere it was Christian winter. Our actions, the actions of our country, the United States, led to the conditions that resulted in the Christian genocide in these countries. And I think that General Flynn, I think that's part of the reason that he's been attacked, because he knows where the bodies are buried on that score. And our actions previous to Trump supported, again, wittingly or unwittingly, deliberately or not, radical Islamic regimes. So I think that, we go into that in somewhat, but I think that's a section that people really need to understand what our wars in the Middle East did to the Christians there.
I read something just the other day that Trump hasn't started any wars.
That's right.
Okay, so let's jump over to chapter 2. That was that other chapter you said that the working Catholic should be concerned about. and that is titled Main Street versus Wall Street. Why should a fence-sitting Catholic who's kind of undecided, why should they read that chapter?
Because it really outlines, and here I have to give a hat tip. We were given permission by Sundance at the Last Refuge, and I know there's different, people have different perspectives on things, but I think he's an incredibly strong writer on this issue, Main Street versus Wall Street. But they should read it just to understand that, look, what Trump is saying is in your best interest. He is arguing for the working man. My father worked at a General Electric plant outside of Boston. And he says, back in the 70s, a guy working on the line, one income, could support his family, vacation in New Hampshire, and all that's gone by the boards, And Trump's economic plan is for the working man, and the Catholic Church has always been for the working man. But Trump's willingness to stand up against the establishment and the free trade, he's in favor of genuine free trade, and his willingness to use tariffs as, if people want to do one thing, I don't know if you saw this, but you mentioned the hyperlinks in the ebook. Yes. I don't know if there's a way to provide a link to this, but we talk about and we provide a link to this phenomenal Michael Moore clip. There's a clip of Michael Moore, who hates Trump, the filmmaker.
Yes.
Rabid Democrat, liberal. There's a clip where he explains what Donald Trump would do for the working man. That 3-minute, 5-minute video, whatever it is, that will convince labor Democrats to vote for Trump. And they'll be crying tears at the end of it. It is such a moving clip.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you will send me a link to that,
okay,
I will put that link in the show notes below the video.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Not a problem. Okay, John, we need to be wrapping up. First of all, thank you for joining me and talking about this book. It is kind of a confusing thing where you have people who claim a Catholic faith, and a Catholic perspective says, pro-life, and yet they vote for candidates who are not pro-life. Very much okay in voting for the death of babies the day before they're supposed to be born, when they're perfectly viable. And it makes me shake my head. Just in closing, can you tell me, what is that phenomenon? Why do people turn a blind eye to that one issue?
I really don't know, except the only thing I can think is that they have a misunderstanding about what freedom means and requires. We're never free to kill the innocent. We're not free to do that. And the law is a teacher. The law should say, no, this is wrong. This is illegal. It should not be allowed. So I think it's just this native loyalty to the Democratic Party. And again, I do think the bishops didn't get out in front of it. There was a politician named Bob Casey, a great Democratic Catholic pro-life hero. He was the last great Democratic pro-life hero, I think. And now they've all, I don't want to say sold their soul. I don't know. It's a serious issue. And I think that Catholic politicians need to reflect carefully on that. You have to think about the fate of your eternal soul. And I think Catholic voters need to do that too. And thankfully, the Democrats are so crazy now. They're promoting unabashedly, all the stuff that's coming out about Planned Parenthood and selling baby parts. If you're just a decent human being, how can you be thinking this type of stuff should be legal?
Exactly. Well, John, tell our listeners how they can find out more about this book.
Well, the publisher is Tan Books. So you can go to tanbooks.com. That's just like it sounds, the color, TANBOOKS.com. And there they have it up on a banner. So it's on the front page. So it'll be easy to find. It's also available on Amazon. And one thing I'd want to emphasize is there are 2 books out about Catholics voting for Trump. Ours is called A Catholic Vote for Trump. The authors of ours are myself, John McCullough, and Jesse Romero. There's another book that's not our book. It's called The Catholic Case for Trump by Austin Ruse. But I would appreciate it if any of your listeners would buy our book, The Catholic Vote for Trump. They're pretty similar in title, but our cover looks nicer. So take the one with the nicer cover.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Daniel.
There you have it. As John said, you can buy the book at tanbooks.com and also at amazon.com. If you wish to purchase the book, I have provided a link down below in the show notes. And of course, you can always leave a comment about the show if you like. You also want to subscribe because you want to get notified when I put up new shows, right? So just click that subscribe button and then click that little bell, and that'll get you notified every time I upload a new show. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at newbookofdaniel@outlook.com. That's newbookofdaniel@outlook.com. I'm also on Facebook, just simply facebook.com/newbookofdaniel. You can also find me on Twitter and Parler, both as @newbookofdaniel. I've also got a blog. Guess what that one's called? Sure enough, newbookofdaniel.com. And of course, you can read my writing on political issues and issues of the day over at uncoverdc.com and also at Red State. I want to thank you for tuning in. My name is Daniel Bobinski. This is the New Book of Daniel podcast, and we'll catch you on the next show. Until then, be blessed.